The ancestral house stood like a forgotten god at the edge of the village, its domed roof arched with vines, its columns cracked like tired bones, and its great wooden doors groaning with every wind. Nari had come there at 7, and now she was 17, and the house still hadn't let her sleep a full night in peace. Its walls whispered. Its windows wept. But more than anything else there was the door, the one at the end of the hallway. It was a tall door, black and smooth as tar, with no handle, no lock, just a seam in the stone that said it could open if it wanted to. Her aunt, who insisted on being called Mistress Salame, rather than anything familial, had told her the rules on her first night. No visitors. No lanterns after midnight. No entering the cellar unless summoned. And never, under any circumstance, open the door at the end of the hall. It holds what must not be seen, she had said in that gravelly voice of hers, the one that seemed to scrape the candlelight thinner when she spoke. Some things keep their shape because they are not touched. Understand? Nari had nodded. Of course she understood. She was a quiet child, observant, the sort that folded her hands in her lap and memorized the cracks in the ceiling rather than speak. Her aunt didn't seem to like voices, especially not young ones. So Nari became a shadow in the halls, moving when spoken to, eating when told, reading only the books in the East Library and only by the window with the broken glass. But the door, oh the door. It began humming when she was 12. Not always, not loudly. Just a low, steady vibration that seemed to slip into her bones as she walked past it. Sometimes if she pressed her ear close she could hear breathing. Other times it sounded like weeping. Once, just once, she could have sworn she heard her mother's voice saying her name. There were no pictures of her mother in the house. Nari had asked once quietly, "Where is my mother's portrait?" Mistress Salame had paused over her needlework and answered, "Dead women don't need faces." And that was the end of it. So Nari learned not to ask. But at night, when the wind hissed under the roof tiles and her candle nearly went out without warning, she'd stare at the ceiling and whisper her mother's name like a spell. Mirani. 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 She didn't know if it helped, but the dark always seemed less cold after that. As she grew, so did the house's strange rhythms. Walls that shifted slightly when she turned corners. Doors that opened on their own, then slammed when she tried to pass. A clock in the west wing that hadn't worked in years, but rang 13 bells every solstice. Still, it was the black door that kept her heart on edge. By 15 she had dreams about it. In them, she stood before the door barefoot, the floor slick with water, the air so cold her breath came in clouds. Behind the door, someone, or something, called her name. Not in a rush. Not in anger. Just called. As if they'd been waiting. Mistress Salame must have known something was happening, for that year she took to locking Nari in her room at night. "For your safety," she'd say, and leave the food tray on the floor like she were feeding a wild beast. Nari never complained. But she began to watch. And wait. It was during the third winter, the one where snow came up to the windows, that Nari first touched the black door. It was late, the hour when owls no longer hooted and even the mice had stilled. She'd picked the lock to her room using a hairpin, moving with the silence of someone who had no one left to trust. The hall stretched before her like a mouth, its red rug worn to threads, its oil lamps dead. At the far end, the black door stood still, its presence so solid it felt like a second heartbeat in the house. She walked toward it, her nightgown brushing her ankles, her hands trembling. When she laid her palm flat against it, the cold bit her skin like teeth. Her breath hitched. The humming was there, louder than ever. A strange melody woven into the vibration, like something old and sorrowful was being sung in reverse. And beneath it, unmistakably, her name. Nari. She jerked her hand back. Ran to her room. Didn't sleep. But she returned the next night. And the next. Always just to touch. Never to push. She didn't know what she wanted, only that the door was part of her now, as familiar as her own shadow. When Mistress Salame caught her one morning with frost on her fingertips, she said nothing, just watched with those sharp gray eyes and muttered something in a language Nari had never heard before. That spring the house began to change more violently. Books vanished from shelves. Paintings peeled themselves off the walls. One night, Nari woke to find her sheets soaked through, her bed floating 2 inches above the floor. Mistress Salame grew pale, silent. She spent whole days muttering in the cellar, and when she came up, she'd sometimes stagger and bleed from the ears. "You're calling it," she whispered to Nari once, voice cracked and thin. "You're waking it up." "I haven't done anything," Nari replied, but the words rang hollow even to her. On the night of her 17th birthday, the humming became a song. It rose from the black door in waves, clear, high, human. A woman's voice. The song had no words but Nari understood it. It was a lullaby, a promise, a plea. Mistress Salame burst into Nari's room before dawn. "You opened it," she spat. "What did you let out?" "I didn't open anything," Nari cried. "I swear." But the house didn't care. It groaned and shuddered as if in birth. The sky outside turned a shade of blue Nari had never seen, too deep, too endless. From every corner the door's melody wove itself through the walls. Mistress Salame slapped her. Art. The first time she had ever touched Nari with anything but cold indifference. "You don't know what it cost to seal it away," she said. "To keep it quiet." "What is it?" Nari whispered, eyes burning. "It's her." "Her who?" But the old woman just turned and walked away. That night, Nari made her choice. She waited until the house had fallen into its usual haunted hush. She took the candle, the key she'd stolen from Salame's robe, and walked the long hallway. The door looked the same, but the air shimmered around it now. Something waited. Something new. She unlocked it. The door didn't swing or creak. It dissolved, vanishing like mist. Beyond it was not a room but a vast space lit from nowhere, the floor an obsidian mirror. In the center stood a woman. Her back was turned, her hair long and silver, her dress made of stars. When she turned, Nari stopped breathing. It was her mother. Or someone who wore her mother's face. "You came?" the woman said. "Who are you?" Nari asked, stepping forward. The woman's smile was slow, sad. "I was sealed here to protect you. They thought I was a danger. They thought if I sang you'd hear. And if you heard you'd come." "What danger?" "I remember who I was now," the woman whispered. "And who you are." The mirror floor began to crack, not with violence but like an egg hatching. Light pulsed from the seams. Behind Nari the house shook. "You are not their child, Nari. You are mine. You are of the song. Of the dark before light. I sang you into the world before they silenced me." Nari's hands trembled. "What does that mean?" "It means you must choose." "Choose what?" The woman held out her hand. "To come with me. To remember. Or to stay here and forget again." Behind her, the door began reforming. Mistress Salame's voice rang down the hall, desperate, broken. Don't listen to her. That thing is not your mother." But Nari's heart was still. She reached forward. Her fingers touched the woman's hand. And the house exploded into light. The storm arrived before the sky turned. It began with a strange heaviness in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. Nari stood by the window watching clouds churn above the fields, dark and roiling. The wind clawed at the shutters and for the first time in years, the crows refused to perch on the roof. Even the trees had stopped moving, as though bracing for something that had nothing to do with rain. She didn't know what woke her that morning, only that her room felt colder than usual, and the candle she'd left half burnt on the sill had been snuffed out. The light through her window was gray, uneasy. She blinked the sleep from her eyes and turned on her side. There on the pillow beside her sat a key. It wasn't like the others Mistress Salame kept on her chain, rusted brass and jagged teeth. This one was made of something darker, glossier, as though carved from obsidian or frozen ink. Its bow was etched with tiny spirals, and it hummed faintly in her hand. Not a vibration, more like a sound just below hearing. Like the key was dreaming. She stared at it for a long time, not moving. Her breath came in shallow pulls. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't placed it. And no one could have entered her room unless. "Mistress," she called, stepping barefoot into the hallway, key gripped tightly. Mistress Salame was already awake, muttering into a cup of bitter black tea in the east kitchen. Her robe was slightly damp, perhaps from the cellar, and her fingers shook as she traced invisible sigils in the wood grain. Nari placed the key gently on the table. "Was this you?" Salame looked up. Her eyes narrowed. "No," she said. "Then who?" "Don't touch it again." "But it was on my pillow." "Then burn the pillow." "And your hands." That should have been enough to frighten her. It used to be. But something had changed since the door opened, something inside Nari that no longer curled at shadows. She wasn't sure if the song had changed her, or if she had only remembered what she had always been. Either way, she took the key back to her room, wrapped it in a piece of linen, and placed it in the hollow behind the wall panel where she kept her other strange things. A feather that never aged, a shard of mirror that showed only the sky, and the little music box that played even when closed. The storm hit by noon. Rain pounded the house in wild sheets, and thunder cracked close enough to make the stone tremble. Every corner seemed alive with sound. Yet it was not the thunder that unsettled her, it was the silence that followed it. Every strike left a gap too long, too hollow, like the storm was waiting for someone to respond. That afternoon, walking past the hallway that led to the black door, Nari stopped. It was open. Only slightly. No more than a hand's width. But enough. Enough to see the absence beyond, the lightless air that seemed to suck her gaze forward. The door had never been open without her touch. Not once. Not in all the years she'd walked this house. She froze. And then, from within the gap, a voice. Soft. Familiar. Nari. It wasn't just her name, it was her voice. Not a perfect echo, but exact in tone and breath, like she was hearing herself call from inside. She staggered back. Nari, come. She clapped her hands over her ears and turned, bolting down the corridor. The air behind her pulsed. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. Whatever lived behind it had decided to speak. And it had chosen her own voice. That evening, Salame didn't emerge from her chamber. The door was bolted, and faint chanting echoed from within, old words in a language that Nari could almost understand. She didn't eat. She sat by her candle, holding the key, the weight of it like a stone in her palm. It didn't feel dangerous. Felt right. Familiar. But that voice. As night fell, the storm deepened. The glass in her windows shivered in their frames. Her books fell from the shelf one by one with no hand to touch them. Still she sat. At some point past midnight, Nari moved to her mirror. She had one, oval, rimmed in brass, slightly tilted from age. She used it rarely, mostly to check the way her hair fell or if her dress was stained. But tonight she stared longer. The face in the mirror was hers. Pale, still, wide-eyed. She reached up and ran her fingers down her cheek. The reflection followed. And then, it didn't. There was a moment, a half-second, a sliver of time, where her hand dropped but the girl in the mirror stayed still. Then, slowly, the reflection followed like it had forgotten it was supposed to be her. Nari stumbled back. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward again sharply. Raised a hand. Wave. The reflection waved, but a beat too late. Her mouth dried. No, she whispered. The mirror girl blinked. And smiled. But Nari hadn't. She grabbed the linen-wrapped key and ran. The hallway stretched before her, flickering with candlelight that shouldn't have been lit. The storm had knocked out every flame, she was sure, but now the sconces glowed like welcoming eyes, lighting her path to the door. The black door. It was open again. Wider this time. The space beyond was not pitch black but a swirling mist, like ink in water. Nari approached, heart slamming. The key vibrated in her hand. And then she saw it, her reflection. Not in a mirror but standing just beyond the threshold. Her same face. Her same dress. Her same wide eyes. Nari, it said. Her own voice again. Her own inflection. But this time it didn't call. It asked, "Are you ready to remember?" Nari stood frozen. "I'm not. I don't." "You came to the door. You always do." "I didn't open it this time." "No. I did." "Why?" "Because it's time." Behind her, the hallway grew darker. Colder. The candle flames dimmed to blue. Time for what? Nari asked, her voice brittle. To be whole. The reflection stepped forward. Into the light. But it didn't shimmer or vanish, it was solid. Her exact height, her exact posture. But something in its eyes, something older. Something hungrier. "I'm you," it said. But not the you they raised. Nari's voice trembled. "Then who?" "I'm the voice they locked away. The part they sealed behind silence. The girl who screamed when they tried to take her name." Nari took a step back. "They split us," the other said. "Her. Your mother. She tried to protect you. Gave them part of you, sealed the rest. I've waited. This is a dream." "No," said the voice. "This is the first time you've seen the whole mirror." Nari turned to flee. But the hallway behind her was gone. In its place fog. Cold. Endless. The house had shifted. The door had opened wide. The reflection girl held out her hand. "I won't force you," she said. "You can live half again. Or come with me. Become what you were. What they feared." Nari's fingers clenched around the key. She thought of the song. Of her mother's voice. Of the strange music box and the door that had never truly stayed shut. She stepped forward. Her hand touched her own. And this time the reflection didn't lag. It smiled and so did she. The door gave way with no sound. It didn't creak or groan or resist like old doors should. It simply parted for Nari as if it had been waiting, as if it recognized her now. The key was no longer needed. It had already done its part. Now the house, this living, breathing place, invited her inward. She crossed the threshold. Mist gathered at her feet. Cold, dense, but dry like the fog that rose from the gray fields in winter. Her breath puffed in front of her and she turned slowly, expecting darkness. Instead, the room glowed faintly, silver light with no source. She was inside a perfect circle, walls made entirely of mirrors. Tall, arched panels lined the curved walls, stretching from the floor to the unseen ceiling, each one framed in iron ivy and velvet wrought. Dust lay thick along the floor, but not a single speck marred the mirrors themselves. They were pristine. At first she thought they didn't reflect anything. Then she looked closer. The mirror directly before her showed her face, but not as it was. Her eyes were sunken, cheeks hollow, hair soaked as if she'd been crying in the rain. She leaned in. The girl in the mirror mirrored her, but her expression was not quite the same. This Nari looked afraid. She stepped to the right. Another mirror. This one showed her older, much older. Wrinkles clung to her skin like secrets, her shoulders stooped. But her eyes remained the same, still full of the storm she now carried in her chest. The older Nari stared back, lips parted slightly, like she was on the verge of saying something important. The third mirror showed her smiling. Not a small smile, not her usual polite curving of the lips, but a wide, almost joyful grin. There was something red on her mouth. Her chin. A trail of blood dripping down her throat. She was dressed in something unfamiliar, dark, ceremonial, too grand for anything she had ever worn. Her eyes sparkled with something close to hunger. Nari staggered back from that one, pressing a hand to her own mouth. Another mirror, this one showing her curled in a corner, weeping into her palms. Her dress was torn. Her fingers bruised. The image didn't look up even when she stared into it. It shook silently, rocking. Every mirror showed her, but not her. Some images were close, some impossibly distant. In one she was dancing with someone she couldn't see, just shadows wrapped around her waist. In another she lay asleep in the grass, covered in leaves. In another she stood in flames, not burning, just watching the fire consume everything behind her. She moved in a circle, trembling. Some versions of herself reached out when she passed. Some turned away. Some smiled too wide. But none of them reflected her truly. Not one followed her movements in real time. And the more she watched, the more she felt it. A growing pull from the center of the room like a heartbeat beneath the stone floor. She stopped. The silence pressed in around her. Not a breath of wind. Not a whisper from the walls. She stepped toward the center, unsure what she was looking for, unsure whether she was still in the same world or beneath it. When she turned around, one mirror had changed. It was the same panel, the same frame. But now, the Nari inside it wasn't doing anything strange. She wasn't older or younger. She wasn't smiling with blood or crying into her sleeves. She stood exactly where Nari stood. Her dress was the same. Her hair fell the same way. But she was moving just a little too slow. Nari raised her hand. The mirror Nari followed, late. She frowned. Moved her head left, then right. The reflection copied her, a beat behind. She took a deep breath. The glass fogged slightly in front of the mirrored mouth, but not hers. She stepped forward. Close enough to see the tiny veins in her own eyes. Close enough to see how the reflection's pupils didn't shrink with the light from her candle. Close enough to know, this was no ordinary mirror. She placed her palm flat against the glass. Her skin was cold against it. The mirror Nari did the same. Except, her fingers didn't meet. The mirrored hand pressed back but a half-inch to the right. Nari's heart stuttered. She adjusted her fingers. The reflection didn't. It stared at her now, face blank, but its eyes were aware. Then, in one sharp motion, the mirror Nari smiled. Not her smile. Not anything she had ever seen in her own face. It was not her. The hand on the other side of the glass began to press harder. The tips whitened against the glass. Then the wrist. The forearm. The arm. The glass didn't crack. It didn't resist. The arm of the reflection was pushing through. Nari gasped and stumbled back, but the mirror image kept moving, reaching out of the glass now, elbow bending as it slid from the surface like the mirror had become water. She turned to run, but the door was gone. There was only the circle of mirrors now. Endless, spiraling, no edges, no corners. And the reflection climbed out. Nari screamed. The reflection stood before her now, breathing. Her same height. Her same features. But the expression was ancient. Patient. Curious. You don't recognize me, it said, voice like her own but wrong. Lower. More rounded. Like someone humming beneath a veil. You're not me, Nari whispered. I'm the part that wasn't allowed to be you. It stepped closer. You left me here, it said. Every time you walked by. Every time you looked away. You're not real. Oh, I'm realer than you, the reflection said, stepping closer still. You're the one they groomed. The obedient girl. The one who learned how to smile with her mouth closed. But me? I'm the scream. The tear. The storm you swallowed. Nari backed into one of the mirrors. The version behind her was a Nari wearing a blindfold, hands tied with gold thread. I didn't choose this, she said. No. But you never fought it either. The reflection raised a hand. Nari braced for impact. But the hand just hovered. Then gently, fingers splayed, it touched her cheek. You feel it now, don't you? It whispered. The pull. The split. What do you want? To remember. To merge. To stop being shadows on glass. I won't let you take me. The reflection tilted its head. Take you? You're the one standing in my room. Something in the air shifted. The mirrors around them began to hum, vibrating softly. The different versions of herself inside them began to move in unison, hands rising to the glass, pressing against it. Dozens of Nairis. All watching. Some smiling. Some weeping. Some awaiting. I didn't ask for this, Nari said again, but the words sounded hollow now. The reflection stepped back. Then leave, it said simply. The door's behind you. Nari turned. And there it was, the way out. The black door open, pulsing. She could run. She could wake up and pretend none of it happened. But her feet didn't move. Her eyes turned back to the center of the room, where her other self waited. I remember the song, Nari said softly. It's been in my head for days. The reflection smiled again. You were always meant to hear it. I don't want to forget again. You won't. Will it hurt? No, said the reflection, but it will change you. Nari stepped forward. The mirrors flickered. Every version of her stood still now, watching as she walked to the center, toe to toe with herself. The reflection held out both hands. And this time, when Nari placed hers against them, the glass didn't come between them. They breathed in sync, moved in sync. And when they closed their eyes, it started with a whisper. Not from the house, not from the mirrors, not even from the strange dreams that had stalked her since she stepped into that circle of selves, but from the village. The living world. The outside. The first time she went down the hill into the marketplace, she noticed it. People turned their heads a beat too quickly when they saw her. A vendor selling ground cassava paused mid-call and frowned. An old woman who used to press cola nuts into Nari's hand when she was a child now crossed herself and looked away. Nari didn't speak. She kept her chin lifted, her steps slow and steady. She bought what she came for, salt, palm oil, a length of cloth, and turned back toward the house. But the back of her neck prickled the whole way as though the sky had eyes. She told herself it was nothing. That the mirror room hadn't changed anything outside her mind. But that night, as she lit her bedside candle, she saw it again, her own face blinking at her from the mirror. Only it wasn't quite her. The difference was too small to name. Her features were all in the same place. But something about the way her eyes settled in their sockets, the shape of her pupils in the flame's flicker, the angle of her cheekbones, they were not how she remembered. She leaned in closer, breath fogging the glass. Her reflection leaned in too. You're me, she whispered. The reflection blinked. And smiled. A little too wide. A little too slow. She stumbled back. The candle toppled from the sill. She caught it just in time, wax searing her fingers. She didn't scream. She just stared at her shaking hand as if it belonged to someone else. The next morning, the children in the village began to cry when she passed. Not tantrums or whines. No, this was sharp, guttural crying, the way children cry when they don't understand the fear in their bodies. One little boy dropped his carved wooden lion and ran behind his mother's skirt, sobbing. Nari paused. She wanted to reach for him, to crouch down and smile and say something kind, but his eyes met hers and he screamed. Screamed like she was fire. Screamed like he saw something no one else could name. The mother muttered an apology, but even she didn't meet Nari's gaze. Nari went home with an empty basket. Mistress Salame didn't ask questions. She hadn't since the mirrors. Not since the day Nari came back from the door and simply said, I went in. That night, she locked Nari's bedroom door from the outside. Click. Metal against metal. Slow and final. Nari heard the sound through the thick walls. She said nothing. The room had become too quiet. She stood in front of the mirror again. This time she didn't look away. Who are you now? She asked. The girl in the mirror did not smile. But her eyes glowed faintly. Nari didn't sleep. Not truly. Her dreams were full of voices, hers and not hers, speaking in a spiral. Questions without end. Answers that arrived late. In the mornings, she woke to find her face wet as if she'd wept through the night. Her pillow soaked. Her fingers clenched tight around the sheets like she had fought something. By the end of the week, she stopped trying to deny it. She was changing. It was in the small things. Her breath fogging the window even in the heat, her footprints lingering longer on the wooden floor, her hands seeming too still even when she moved. She watched a fly crawl across her wrist one evening, and when she blinked, it was dead. She hadn't touched it. It just stopped moving. Mistress Salame began to avoid her. No more meals together. No more instructions. She left notes outside the locked door, short and cold. Water in the basin. Sleep. Do not leave after dusk. Asterisk asterisk. Nari did not obey. She went into the cellar. It was damp and humming, like the mirrors had taught the stone how to listen. Old symbols were carved into the pillars, some fresh, some rotted away with time. She traced them with her fingers and found she could hum them awake. Candles lit themselves. Books opened at her touch. She found one with no title, bound in a skin that was too soft to be leather. The pages were black, the writing white and writhing. It didn't stay still. The letters moved when she wasn't looking, curling and uncurling like roots in search of water. She read anyway. And something inside her opened further. She began to dream with her eyes open. Waking hours bled into memories she didn't own. She saw herself walking through rain barefoot, but not in this life. She saw a face made of ash and teeth that bowed when she passed. She heard the same song again, sung now in 1,000 voices at once, and every single voice was hers. But still in the mirror the face didn't settle. It shifted each day just slightly. Some days her eyes were too dark, like ink with no bottom. Some days her mouth tilted even when she wasn't smiling. One morning she woke to find her reflection not there at all. Only her room, lit and empty behind glass. It came back the next day. But she didn't trust it anymore. When she touched her skin it felt right, but the girl in the mirror always flinched a moment later. She thought, briefly, of returning to the mirror room. To the circle. But something in her said not yet. The villagers began to whisper openly now. She heard her name on their tongues, followed by words like possessed and marked. One afternoon while walking past the chapel she heard someone mutter, "That's not the girl who used to live up there. That one's hollow." She turned sharply. The man flinched. Backed away. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because he was right. The girl who used to live in the ancestral house had been shaped like silence and obedience. She had been folded in on herself, wrapped in rules, kept soft and small. That girl had never touched the dark door. Had never looked herself in the eye and asked, "What have they hidden?" That girl had never smiled with blood on her chin. But the thing she had become, the girl walking now through whispers and cold, was different. Not evil. Not broken. Just awake. When she returned home that evening, she found her bedroom window had been boarded up. Mistress Salame didn't even try to explain. Just a locked door. A tray of food. And silence. Nari sat on the bed. Picked up the cracked hand mirror she kept hidden under the mattress. And saw once again a stranger. Not completely. But almost. The stranger looked stronger. Taller somehow. Her eyes were storm-colored now. Not just dark but weathered. The smile she gave back was calm. And this time, when Nari moved her hand, the reflection didn't follow. It simply watched. And then slowly lifted its hand to the glass. A beat too late. Just like before. Nari exhaled long and steady. "Whatever I am now," she whispered, "you're not ahead of me anymore." The reflection tilted its head. And for the first time it looked almost afraid. Nari began to measure time differently now. Not in hours or days, not in the movements of the sun or the ringing of the bells in the chapel below, but in glances. In stolen seconds. In the moments when the glass gave her something that it shouldn't. At first it was simple. She would walk past a window or a basin or the brass lanterns polished to a dull shine, and there she was. Her reflection. But never quite in sync. Always just a breath behind. Always blinking a little slower, breathing a little deeper like someone underwater. She tested it. Over and over. Lifted her hand. Turned her head. Blinked. Sometimes the delay was a heartbeat. Sometimes it was more than 3 full seconds. And once, for the briefest moment, the reflection didn't move at all. Just stared. She stopped checking the larger mirrors after that. She covered the one in her bedroom with a cloth. She avoided the still puddle by the front path. But the reflections found her anyway. In the glint of a spoon. In the panes of the greenhouse where the herbs were left to die. In the sheen of her own dark hair when she caught it from the corner of her eye. She saw herself again and again, watching her with a look she couldn't describe. Not curiosity. Not even malice. It was hunger. Quiet, patient hunger. Like the way the forest watched when you wandered too far from the path. Mistress Salame had grown sick. It wasn't a sudden illness. It was the kind that settled low and slow, in the bones, in the breath. Her color was wrong. Her hands shook. She no longer spoke to Nari, only left notes. But even the notes had begun to slant strangely, the ink running toward the page's edges as if trying to escape. One evening, Nari found her aunt on the floor of the cellar, surrounded by books and melted wax, whispering to a cracked mirror she'd placed in a circle of salt. Nari didn't interrupt. She simply turned and walked back upstairs. She didn't ask what was being said. She already knew. That night the reflection moved first. She had been brushing her hair in the dark, using only the moonlight that slipped in through the one remaining crack in her boarded window. She had lifted her brush, yawned, let the strands fall down her shoulder. And then she saw it. The girl in the mirror raised her hand before Nari did. Not a fraction of a second before. A full moment. Enough to mean something. Nari froze. The reflection didn't. It smiled, small, faint but certain. Then it leaned slightly closer to the glass, placed a hand against the surface and waited. Nari's chest tightened. The brush slipped from her fingers, thudding softly against the floorboards. She stood, crossed the room in 5 slow steps. Her face looked back, serene, unmoving. She lifted her own hand. Not to wave, not to test, just to see. When her palm met the glass, she expected cold. And at first it was. But after a moment, no, not quite a moment, she realized something else. The glass itself was cold. But the reflection's hand was warm. Not heat through glass. Not warmth like a memory. This was real, alive, pressing. Nari's fingers trembled. She wanted to pull back, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, her brow nearly touching the glass. "I see you," she whispered. The reflection said nothing. But its lips curled, not in a smile but something deeper. Understanding. Familiarity. Like a long-lost sister leaning out from a dream. The next morning, her face had changed again. Not dramatically. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The corners of her mouth tilted upward when she wasn't speaking. Her irises had gone darker still, so dark now they looked like ink had been dropped into them. And her skin shimmered faintly under candlelight, like something beneath the surface was shifting. She watched herself eat breakfast in a silver spoon and saw her reflection chewing just a little too slow. And when she whispered to it, "Why now?" she was sure she saw it blink. Mistress Salame no longer left her food. The trays stopped coming. So Nari began to cook for herself, pulling flour from jars, dragging water from the well out back. She lit fires in the hearth the old way, not with matches but with breath and will. And the flames obeyed. One evening, as she poured water into a pot, she caught her reflection in the metal. The girl in the water was smiling. Full. Hungry. And for the first time Nari smiled back. "You're not trapped, are you?" she said aloud. The reflection tilted her head. "You were waiting." A soft knock at the window startled her. She turned. Nothing. But the window pane bore the faint outline of a hand. Pressed for just a second from the inside. She did not sleep that night. Not out of fear. Out of anticipation. What came next? In the deep quiet, she lay in bed with the mirror uncovered, watching the girl inside sleep with her eyes open. She whispered secrets. The reflection mouthed them back. Some nights she laughed. Other nights she wept. Once she asked, "What will you do if I let you out?" The girl in the mirror only blinked. Slowly. Lovingly. She didn't answer. But Nari already knew. The answer was simple. The reflection would not take her place. It would become her. Because, in some way, it always had been. By the end of the week, the changes were no longer deniable. When she smiled, strangers crossed themselves. When she spoke, birds went silent. When she passed the chapel again, the priest looked up once, clutched his robe, and shut the door before she could get close. In the mirror, her other self had grown bolder. She moved more freely now, even when Nari wasn't in front of the glass. Sometimes she walked to the edge of the frame and looked out like she was studying the boundaries. Sometimes she pressed her face right up to the glass as if listening. Once she turned her back to Nari entirely. And what Nari saw carved down the spine of her reflection's neck made her breath freeze in her chest. A mark. A shape that pulsed. She stepped back. Her own neck throbbed. She ran to the basin, splashed water onto her skin, pulled her collar down. Nothing. No mark. But her skin itched for the rest of the night, and the mirror girl smiled without looking back. Mistress Salame tried to burn the mirror 2 nights later. Nari woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of muttered curses. She ran into the hall, following the flicker of firelight, and found her aunt kneeling before the hearth, dragging the mirror across the stones with a rusted blade in one hand and a jug of lamp oil in the other. "You don't understand," Salame said. "You don't know what that thing is." "She's me," Nari said calmly. "She's what they split off. She's what your mother died to keep silent." Nari stepped forward. The reflection inside the mirror leaned toward the firelight. "You don't have to be afraid of her," Nari said. "I'm not." "You should be," Salame rasped, eyes wide. "She was born in silence. She lived in the dark, fed on your breath, your shadow. Every time you looked away, she got stronger. She waited for me. She waited for your body. Your place in the world." Nari stepped between her aunt and the flames. The mirror flickered beside her. "She isn't replacing me," Nari said. "She's the part one needed." Salame dropped the blade. It clattered against the stone, old metal against old grief. "You don't understand what you're opening," she whispered. Nari looked at the mirror. "I think I do." She carried it back to her room that night. Set it on the wall. Lit candles on either side. The reflection was waiting. They stared at each other in silence for a long time. Then Nari placed her hand against the glass again. The surface shimmered. This time, the reflection's fingers were already there. No delay. No lag. Skin against skin. Heat against heat. And for the first time, Nari felt something pass through. Not a chill. Not a sound. But a memory. A memory that wasn't hers. Running barefoot through a place made of shadow and song, laughing into a void that echoed her voice back as thunder. Being alone. Being whole. Waiting. Waiting for her. Nari pressed her forehead to the mirror. The glass warmed. The girl inside moved at the same time. Perfectly. No delay. They had caught up to each other at last. And neither one of them flinched. The diary was almost invisible, wedged between two broken floorboards beneath a tower of rust-webbed trunks. Nari discovered it by accident while searching the forbidden room for blankets. The wind had shifted and every window in the house leaked cold. She tugged the planks apart with the edge of a candle holder and felt her fingers close around something small and wrapped in oilcloth. When she unwrapped it, the cloth tore like old skin, and a faint smell of cedar and dust rose into the air. It was a book, slender and unadorned, bound in calfskin so dry it flaked beneath her thumb. No title, no embossing, just a single brass clasp that snapped open with a sigh. She expected brittle pages filled with cramped handwriting. Instead, she found nothing at all, sheet after sheet of blank, yellowed paper, the fibers mottled by time but empty of ink. Even the flyleaf was bare. Yet the binding felt weighted, as though the book carried stories too heavy for ink alone. She closed it, opened it again, flipped to the middle. Still blank. A trick, perhaps, or some half-finished journal abandoned by a servant decades earlier. She slid the diary under her arm, meaning to return it later, and climbed the spiral stairs back to her chamber. The wooden steps groaned in the hush. Every sound in the old house seemed louder since the mirrors had woken. Mistress Salame was nowhere to be seen. A relief, and a worry. Her aunt had begun disappearing into the cellar for hours, her footsteps dragging like chains across stone. Nari felt the absence now, its shape in the air, but she did not seek her. Instead, she set the diary on her desk, lit 3 candles against the growing dark, and sat. The blankness bothered her. She wet the nib of a pen in ink, thinking to test the paper, but something, instinct or the echo of her reflection's smile, made her stay the nib. She pricked her left thumb with the needle she kept for mending. A bead of blood welled and trembled. She let one drop fall to the center of the first page. The page drank. The blood vanished like rain on parched earth, leaving no stain. Then, faintly, a line of words rippled across the fibers, rising the way letters emerge from invisible ink held over a flame. The script was elegant, curved, unlike any penmanship she had seen in the house. "I begin this record in the year 1825, on the eve of my 17th summer. My name is Nari." The candle hissed. Nari inhaled, heartbeat hammering. She turned the page, pressed another drop from her thumb, and watched sentences bloom across the sheet. "They say the house is haunted by its own shadow, but I have found the shadow is mine. I hear her at night, humming, waiting, breathing where no body stands." The lines ended. Nari wiped her thumb and pressed again. Inkless words unfurled. "Today my aunt warned me again. Never open the door at the hall's end. Yet I feel its cool breath when I sleep. The mirror room calls. I think my mother knew of it, she died with a mirror shard in her fist. Nari's vision swam. She pressed harder, coaxing a thin smear of crimson. More text appeared. I've seen a smile I do not wear. The pulse in her thumb ached, but she could not stop. Page after page, drop after drop, the diary filled itself, telling a life that felt uncannily parallel. A lonely child, an austere aunt, a forbidden door that hummed in the dark. The girl wrote of reflections that lagged, of villagers who crossed themselves, of a mirror that offered warmth through glass. It was her story, but shifted in time, as if some current beneath the years carried the same events to shore again and again. Yet there were differences, echoes out of step. The diarist spoke of a brother lost in the well, of bells that rang backward at dusk, of a silver lark that died and rose 3 nights in succession. Nari knew none of these things, but each detail throbbed with a truth she could feel in her teeth. She came to an entry dated the 14th day of monsoon 1825. My aunt has begun locking my door. I wake with wax seals on the latch and salt across the threshold. She fears what grows in my face, but I am no longer afraid. Tonight I will go to the mirrors. If this be my last writing, know that I enter willingly. Nari's candle guttered. Wax spilled down the copper holder. She read on. I have carried a shard with me hidden in cloth. They say if blood meets its twin in glass, the path opens. I will cut my palm and press against her. If she takes my hand, we will be one voice again. A splatter of ink, no blood, dotted the margin as though the pen had trembled. Then a final line, thin and slanted. Remember me, whoever follows. The diary ended there. The remaining pages stayed mute no matter how much blood she offered. They seemed to recoil, fibers closing against the drop. Nari closed the cover with shaking hands. A century ago, another Nari had walked the mirror's edge and vanished. And now she sat here, her own skin singing with the same call. A click sounded beyond her door. She startled, snuffing 2 candles. Footsteps creaked down the corridor, lighter than Mistress Salame's. Childlike. Nari opened the door a slit. The hallway was empty, but cold air drifted from the distant black door. The hum she knew so well thrummed like a heartbeat at the threshold of hearing. She slipped into the corridor, diary clutched to her chest, thumb still bleeding. Each step felt rehearsed by memory, not her own. As she neared the door, she saw that it was not fully shut, just as the diarist had described. A sigh of mist coiled at the seam, exhaling as if the room within breathed. Her fingers brushed the wood. It felt neither warm nor cold, but alive, like muscle beneath thin skin. She pushed. The door swung open without protest. Candlelight from her desk did not reach this place, yet she saw clearly, the circular chamber of mirrors exactly as she remembered, but dustless now, glistening as though polished for a ceremony. In each panel stood a version of herself, but for once they moved in perfect unison, as if awaiting her cue. She stepped to the center. The diary pulsed against her ribs. She opened it to the blood-written page. A breeze, impossible indoors, turned the leaves until the final entry lay bare. The blot of blood in the corner shimmered, fresh and what though it was 100 years old. Instinct guided her hand, she pressed her bleeding thumb to the stain. A tremor rippled through the glass walls. All around, the reflections blinked out of sync, then stilled, then began to smile, every one of them the same slow widening of lips. She drew the shard of mirror from her pocket, the piece she had stolen weeks ago from the cellar. Without hesitation, she sliced her palm. Blood welled hot and vivid. She placed the wound against the nearest mirror. It should have been cold. Instead, warmth flooded her skin, pulsing to the beat of another heart. The glass softened. Her hand sank until her wrist vanished past the surface. She felt fingers curl around hers, familiar, firm, welcoming. Her mirror self stepped forward, merging limb with limb. Pain flared, bright and clean like a violin string plucked too tight, and then it became something else, certainty. Images burst behind her eyes. 2 girls, 1 century apart, both named Nari, both walking the same corridor, both drawing the same breath. She felt the older Nari's memories flood her, running through fields of indigo, whispering to moths that drank tears, standing under black rain that smelled of iron and roses. She felt the loneliness, the hunger for completion, the fear that she would always be only half a song. The warmth spread up her arm, across her chest, through her throat. Every mirror brightened as though dawn rose inside glass. Each reflection glowed, then melted inward, streaming toward the panel that held her bleeding hand. They converged in a swirl of silver and shadow, coiling into the body half emerged from the mirror. Light flared. The room thundered with a sound like distant surf. And then silence. Sudden, profound. Nari opened her eyes. Only one reflection remained, standing calmly in the mirror before her. It copied her perfectly, no delay. She lifted her healed palm. The mirror Nari lifted hers at the same instant, and they touched glass skin to glass skin, warmth equal on both sides. She felt whole, yet more than whole, as though the missing chambers of her heart had grown back, stronger than before. The diary slipped from her other hand and hit the stone floor with a soft thud. Pages fluttered. Where blood had once unveiled ink, now the paper blazed with solid black script, every line visible without wound or offering. She glanced down. The words rearranged themselves, forming new sentences that glowed dull red. The girl who vanished was never gone. She waits in every shard, in every unanswered echo. She is the key in the door and the name. She's you. A tremor ran through the house, gentle as a cat stretching. Somewhere distant, she heard timbers settle, locks give way, windows sigh open to the night. The ancestral home was exhaling a century of held breath. From the corridor came the faint clap of footsteps. Her aunt, or perhaps villagers emboldened by rumor, but Nari did not move. She reached forward again, and this time her hand passed through the mirror's skin like mist, painlessly, naturally, as though the boundary were no more than curtain. The reflection stepped out to meet her. Two bodies, two souls, yet one pulse between them. The air smelled of rain on stone, of iron and roses, of pages turned by ghosts. She felt neither fear nor haste. The diary's words rang in her mind. A record begun in 1825, now complete in 2025. A circle closed. She looked back only once, to the doorway and the long hall beyond. Candlelight flickered there, timid and mortal. Then she turned to her twin, nodded, and together they walked into the glass, into the room behind all mirrors, leaving the diary cooling on the floor, its ink still shifting, writing still living, waiting for the next hand brave enough to bleed. The forgetting began quietly. At first, Mistress Salame would pause too long before saying Nari's name. She'd squint as if trying to place her in a crowd, her lips moving without sound. Then she started using strange titles, child, girl, you there, each colder than the last. Nari noticed but said nothing. She had grown used to being a stranger even in her own skin. Then came the afternoon when Salame passed her in the hallway without a glance. She didn't just look through Nari. She flinched. As though the sight of her sparked something she couldn't name, like seeing your own shadow move in a direction you didn't. That evening, Nari set the table as usual. 2 bowls. 2 spoons. She stirred the porridge with one hand and watched the doorway, waiting. Her aunt appeared just as the flame began to dim, and when she entered, her eyes went wide. You, she whispered, clutching the wall. Who are you? Nari turned slowly, the wooden ladle still in her hand. You know who I am. Salame shook her head. No. No. Her eyes were softer, quieter. You look like her, but you're not her. Nari stepped closer. Then who do you think I am? Her aunt began to tremble. A visitor, she said. You must be a guest, passing through. That's all. I've lived here since I was a child. No, Salame said, shaking her head harder now. She was a child. You, what are you? Her voice cracked on the last word as though it cut her throat to say it. She backed away from the table, eyes never leaving Nari's face. You're wearing her like a dress. Nari's heart didn't race. It had long since learned not to. Why are you afraid of me? She asked, her voice low. Salame stumbled into the corner of the room, breath ragged. You opened the door, she whispered. You touched the mirrors. I told you never to open that door, never to look at what looks back. You already knew I would. Salame's hands clawed at her own chest. She got out, she muttered. I locked her in. I sealed her with salt and prayer and silence. But she got out. Nari stared at her. You mean me? The old woman's head jerked toward her. No, she spat. No, you're not her. Not anymore. Nari felt something shift behind her ribs. Not anger. Not sorrow. Recognition. Mistress Salame collapsed into the chair with a sudden gasp, as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. She clawed at the edge of the table, eyes wide and wet. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then she screamed. A single word. She. The rest never came. She slumped forward, knocking over her untouched bowl. Steam rose from the spilled porridge, silent and curling like the last of a breath. Nari stood motionless, watching the old woman's body sag into itself. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply whispered to the empty room, You were right. She touched her own chest as if to feel what had changed. The skin was warm. The heartbeat steady. But she knew. Somewhere behind her reflection, something had passed through the glass. Something had stepped fully into her place. And now, even her aunt could not remember the line between them. She packed without a sound. A single satchel, a shawl, a loaf of bread, the old diary folded shut, and the smallest of the house keys. The mirror room, the cellar, the attic, all locked behind her. She had left everything she didn't need, including her shadow, it seemed. Mistress Salame was gone, buried beneath the old fig tree, her grave marked with salt and silence. No priest would come. No bell had rung. Nari dug the hole herself with her hands. When she stepped out of the house, the air felt new, not lighter but thinner, stretched tight like the skin over healing wounds. The trees along the hill's edge swayed slightly though there was no wind. The grass bent as she passed and the birds didn't sing. She didn't look back. But as she walked down the road into town, past the chapel and the smithy and the stone circle by the well, she noticed something strange. In the puddles left by last night's rain she saw her reflection, but not quite. It wasn't following her anymore. In the surface of a shallow pool by the chapel steps, her face stared upward, unmoving. She bent over it. The reflection blinked. But it didn't match her own movement. She turned her head. It didn't. She waved. It didn't lift a hand. She continued walking, but now she checked every glass, every shadow. In the grocer's window, she saw a girl with her face pressed flat against the pane, lips parted, eyes wide with something that looked like pleading. The girl knocked once, softly, from inside the glass. Nari stopped breathing. A passing man glanced at her and frowned, muttering something about bad weather and worse omens. The butcher's window showed nothing at all. Just racks of meat and faint streaks of blood. But in the next shop's mirrored tray she saw her again, the reflection. Still dressed as Nari, still wearing her face. But her expression was twisted in grief. She mouthed something soundless. Please? Nari backed away. She fled the market. She returned to the hill, sat beneath the fig tree and stared into her own palm. It still bore the faint scar where the mirror had once opened. The warmth that had filled her when the reflection stepped through now felt incomplete. Had she come through whole? Or had something been left behind? That night the village dreamed of her. The first was an old woman who woke weeping. She was in my mirror, she sobbed to her son. Weeping like a child. Scratching. Asking me to open it. Then a child who screamed for hours. She was stuck, he whispered through chattering teeth. She said her name. She said she was sorry. She said she wasn't the one who came out. The baker's apprentice fainted at dawn after telling his mother, I saw her in the dough, her hands pressed against the glass and I felt her crying. One by one the townspeople spoke of her, the girl in the glass. Trapped. Alone. Desperate. Nari didn't dream at all. But when she looked into the basin to wash her face she saw nothing. No reflection. Not even the shimmer of her outline. She was alone on both sides now. And someone, was still knocking to come home.